All right, let's jump right in. We are going on a journey today to answer a question that has driven language learners and teachers kind of crazy for centuries. What is the single best way to learn a new language? This has been a huge quest, and believe me, it has led to some pretty wild and fascinating ideas. So let's trace the story of this epic debate.
So really, what is the best way? I mean, if you have ever tried to pick up another language, you've definitely asked this. Should you be memorizing giant vocabulary lists, or maybe just dive in and start talking and, hope for the best? For more than 100 years, this one question has ignited what are basically method wars, with each side claiming they'd found the one true path.
Okay, let's start with the original heavyweight champion of language teaching, the grammar translation method. And, well, linguist H. Douglas Brown did not pull any punches. He said it does virtually nothing to help a student actually talk to another human being. You could literally study for years this way and still be totally lost trying to order a coffee. So what was going on here?
Well, the grammar translation method, or GTM for short, basically treated learning a language like it was a logic puzzle. The whole point wasn't really to communicate, it was more about mental exercise and being able to read old classical literature. Your classroom time was all about dissecting grammar, memorizing these endless word lists, and just translating sentences back and forth. It was super intellectual, for sure, but it kind of missed the whole point of language as, a living, breathing way to connect with people.
So you can imagine what happened next. The fact that GTM was creating students who couldn't actually speak the language they were studying. Well, it sparked a revolution. What came next was this series of pretty intense reactions, like a pendulum just swinging wildly from one extreme to the other, all in a desperate search for something that would actually work. Welcome to the Great Method Wars.
And things moved fast. The middle of the 20th century saw this explosion of new ideas. In the 50s, the audiolingual method burst onto the scene. Then in the 70s, that gave way to the communicative approach. It was just this period of rapid-fire change and innovation.
And just look at this. It was a complete 180. The audiolingual method, or ALM, swung that pendulum as far away from GTM as it could get. Forget reading and writing, ALM was all about listening and speaking. It used these repetitive drills over and over to build automatic habits. The goal wasn't careful translation, it was a conditioned automatic response. But there was a problem. ALM created learners who could recite dialogues perfectly, but would just freeze up in a real conversation. So this led to the next big shift, communicative language teaching, or CLT. The focus wasn't on perfect grammar anymore. It was on successful communication. Making mistakes was okay, as long as you got your point across. You can see the journey so clearly, from rules to drills to just real conversation.
But even with all these different methods battling it out, there was still this huge nagging problem. The constant search for one single best method, it was a dead end. The real breakthrough, the game changer, didn't come from a new method at all. It came from a completely new way of thinking about what it even means to know a language.
This was the million-dollar question, right? Think about it. If GTM, ALM, and CLT all have totally different goals and techniques, how on earth can you compare learners from each system? How do you define what good at a language even looks like? There was no common yardstick, no ruler everyone agreed on.
And then, finally, in 2001, the answer arrived. And it wasn't another teaching method, it was a framework, a common map for every language called the CEFR. And for the very first time, teachers, employers, and learners all had a shared language to talk about ability. The whole conversation shifted from how do you teach to what can you do? And what the CEFR gave us was this beautifully simple ladder. It breaks down proficiency into three main stages: basic, independent, and proficient user, with each one split into two levels. All of a sudden, vague terms like intermediate or advanced had real, concrete meaning. A B1 user? Yeah, they can handle most situations while traveling. A C1 user? They can operate just fine in a university or professional setting. It made the whole idea of proficiency something you could actually grab onto.
But the real stroke of genius in the CEFR is its philosophy. It's built on something called can-do descriptors. So instead of focusing on all your grammar mistakes and what you haven't mastered yet, it focuses on your actual abilities. Can you introduce yourself? Can you get the main idea of a news broadcast? It's this positive, empowering perspective that shifts from what you lack to look at all you can accomplish.
Now, the CEFR didn't kill off all those old methods. What it did was organize them. It created a space where a new, much more flexible approach could thrive,
an approach that looks less like a rigid rulebook and more like a really well-stocked toolbox. So today, the big idea is something called principled eclecticism. I know, it sounds a little fancy, but the core idea is incredibly simple. There is no one-size-fits-all method. A great teacher is like a skilled craftsperson. They don't just use a hammer for every single job, right? No, they look at the job and select the perfect tool from their toolbox, the right technique for that specific learner, for that specific goal in that specific situation.
And in a real classroom, this looks like a really smart blend of everything we've talked about. A teacher might grab a pronunciation drill from ALM, use a discovery task from CLT to explore a grammar point, and you know what? They might even use a quick translation straight out of GTM if it's just the fastest way to get an idea across. It's all about being pragmatic and using what works.
Okay, so we've been on this whole journey, from these super rigid rules to a flexible modern toolbox. But what's the big takeaway for you, the person actually trying to learn a language? Why does any of this history actually matter?
Honestly, this might be the most important shift of all. It's about the goal itself. The old dream, which was often totally impossible, was to sound exactly like a native speaker. The new and much healthier goal is to become an effective L2 user. It's not about erasing your accent or never ever making a mistake. It's about building a functional ability that lets you communicate and do the things you want to do.
And get this, your ability isn't just one flat number. You have a unique profile of skills. You might be an absolute rock star at reading, maybe at a B2 level. But when it comes to speaking off the cuff, you feel more like a B1. And that is completely, 100% normal. Understanding your personal profile is what helps you target your learning right where you need it most.
So this whole quest for the best method, it doesn't end with a single answer. It ends with you asking a much better question. Forget about perfection. Forget about sounding like a native. Instead, ask yourself this: what do I actually need to do with this language? And what unique profile of skills is going to get me there? That, right there, is the real key.